For years, people have been writing to me and requesting that I interview the creator of the Gene Keys, Richard Rudd. And sometimes things have to roll out in their own time, and the time is now. And I feel it's now because we're all going through such an incredible period of history with so much opening up to us and so much closing down to us. So, what better time to begin understanding where we're headed as a species and where we're headed individually, and how we can begin rolling out our true program, our true destiny, as our genes are programmed to do with a little bit of our conscious help. So let's go to Richard. Richard, it's so good to have you with me.
Oh, thank you, Regina. It's lovely. It's been lovely getting to know you a bit, and I'm really happy to be here. Delighted.
Well, I am too. I have to say, it's been really fun. It's been really fun. Leading up to this interview, we have a mutual friend, someone you've known many years, who is a close friend of mine as well, that said, it's time to interview Richard again. She knew that I had interviewed you years ago on Gaia in this weird little studio. I don't know if you recall it. It was just this awful place that we had come up with. Who knows how that happened, but it did. And but that was, well, probably 6-7 years ago. And much has happened with the Gene Keys since then, and much has happened with humanity since then. So anyway, we started downloading our profiles on genekeys.com, right? And people are looking at each other's our profiles. A couple of us said, let's just get the book now so we can start interpreting it. But what was so amazing to me, and you have to tell us where this magic comes from, is that in those key 4 paragraphs that come up in your free profile, the first paragraph just seemed to strike each person, each of us, so deeply as having a really essential truth in it. So I'd love for you to just comment on that before we get into how this all came about.
Yeah, well, you know, the Gene Keys is all, I mean, a word I like to use because it's very kind of hip and understood at the moment is algorithms. They're the algorithms of our being. So, you know, that in a way, when you understand the algorithms that run humanity or run consciousness, then if you have a good language command, then it's quite easy to interpret those algorithms in your language, and just put them into something that helps people understand more about themselves. So that's kind of.
But it's more than that. It's almost magical in that it's almost like a divination of sorts of some really incredibly key parts of self that pop up right away. And that's how, of course, people say, oh my God, that's so me, or that's so true, and I haven't been looking at it. And so however you have done this, it has a kind of magic to it, in my opinion. And I don't know if that's an appropriate word to use. So let's talk about the magical way in which this all came about. You as a young man, and then you made this journey one morning to a monastery and laid down with a stone under your head. And let's go from there.
Yeah, well, there were 2 things actually. There was the event that you're talking about, where which I describe in the beginning of my book, where I was in Italy and in St. Benedict's grotto, where St. Benedict had his vision of his church, which became the Benedictine movement, a huge monastic movement, still very much alive today. And I wasn't particularly a Christian pilgrim or anything like that. I just happened to be there with my parents. They were, you know, on a kind of journey exploring my uncle who was killed in the war in Italy, and we were going to his cemetery. Anyway, that's why I was there. And I was lying in that cave on where he had his head, and I just, described opening my eye, because the nuns had let me in early before anyone arrived, so I had the place to myself, and for several hours, and I was lying there, and then I kind of had my eyes shut, but I saw these 2 eyes looking at me, really bright, and it passed through my whole body, the feeling of what was in those eyes. It was the eyes that had seen the Lord, and the eyes that knew, the eyes of a being who absolutely and 100% had cellular certainty of its divinity. And so, it was a nice moment that I capture it in the beginning of my book. But in a way, that was a kind of after tremor of an earlier experience where, I had a full-on kind of mystical awakening experience. And I know that we hear these stories from time to
Can
time.
you talk about that a little bit, though?
Yeah, mine was unusual in that I've not heard of another one similar in the fact that I was asleep. So I'd gone to bed the night before. I was, living in a small cottage in the south of England. I'd gone to bed the night before and I woke up. And as I woke up into the experience. So I woke up from my sleep into awakeness. That's what I'm saying. I haven't heard of another account like that. So it's a little
No,
bit.
that's not typical. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's a
I've
little bit.
interviewed a lot of people that have had awakenings, and that's
Yeah.
the first time I've heard that one.
But it's quite funny in a way. So I just woke up into this experience that then lasted for 3 days and 3 nights and didn't stop. And it was being in this field of light, of this intelligence, of light, of higher consciousness, I guess, and knowing my true self. And it was a really earth-shattering 3 days and 3 nights. I didn't sleep. And in a way, I was in this kind of cosmic consciousness, I guess you could say, and anything I wanted to know, I could know. I mean, it was like, wow, it was like I was like a child being given the secrets of the universe. Anything you want to know, when you're in this state, you can know it, from the past, from the future, evolution, how things work, all of that. And it's communicated to you in an instantaneous, fathomless way. From the field of light, and so, yeah, and I went on a journey also in those 3 days. I kind of had a sort of clear voice in me that was taking me on this journey, and lots of amazing things happened over those 3 days. And I ended up in North Wales on a small island called Bardsey Island, very mythical place, allegedly the place where Merlin came to rest. And I had to find a fisherman to take me out there, in a little boat, because there was no crossings or anything like that. It's a tiny little place. And he dumped me there and left me there for the day. And I sat on this little hill of the island, like a sparkling jewel in the middle of a blue sea. There was only one on the island. And the state, I remember the state lifting, sort of falling off me. As I sat on that hilltop, it sort of it started coming to a close, like it returned to the earth. It was like this shawl falling off me, and then I was returned to my kind of ordinary state. And then the fisherman came and picked me up at the end of the day. And for the next 7 years, I was literally struggling, with what had happened.
Well, how does one even begin to process 3 days of information that opened you to the cosmos and the future of humanity, and be able to articulate that into this incredible volume of work, these 64 gene keys? I wonder about how does that even happen? And those 7 years that followed, what did you do? How did you process it?
I went through lots of different phases. I'm being quite honest, I went through a very vain Messiah complex phase that lasted a few months, where I just thought, I'm it. And I was aware of the psychosis, close.
It's kind of obligatory. Everyone's had an opening, seems to go through the Messiah.
So I had that Messiah bit, and then I had the denial phase that lasted like maybe a year, where I just said, I was a bit later. I just said that didn't happen. It was just, I could just get on with my life. I can't, comprehend it. It was an illusion. I don't know why, because I didn't take anything. I was not on anything. It was just that was why I couldn't blame anything. And prior to that moment, I was never a particularly imbalanced person. I had a good childhood. Fairly privileged, and anyway,
not known to be delusional.
No. And anyway, so there was that phase, and then there was various other phases. But it slowly I started to because I didn't have a framework for it at all. I had nothing to hang it on, and my friends were growing up and having children and going on to getting jobs, and I just couldn't do those things because this thing had just stopped me, and I was on sort of pause and trying to integrate it. I didn't know what to do, and I but slowly started to integrate it. I think it took me 7 years. And in those 7 years, I came across I traveled a lot and I went through various systems and things which helped me piece it together. Particularly the I Ching became a very good framework, the 64 code I Ching and the system human design, which uses the 64. So those became like pillars, and several other things, and all the other things I'd accumulated, I guess, over my lifetime up until
So
that
then,
point.
did it become a process of contemplation fueled by the things you just mentioned that allowed this information to flow from you, as you say, to flow from you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the human design piece, which is, it was a really important piece, because I went to sit with Ra Uru, the founder, and got to know him very well, and in his presence, I felt the same transmission that I had, and I can't explain that. I thought this guy's had the same transmission, and it was around 1987 that he had an experience, and mine was 1996, but it had the same flavor to it. And
Very
yet
much so.
it was coming through him in a very different way. I hadn't sort of worked it out yet, but I recognized it. And so I sat in the back of his classes. I didn't take a single note. I never took a note. I wasn't interested in learning it particularly in that way. I just absorbed the sort of frequencies because it was still quite fresh in him, his teaching. And I'd also I'd studied with Taoist teachers in the East and things. So I had other frameworks as well that I was integrating. And I've been to India, just like, all of us on pilgrimages. And yeah, so I was assimilating a lot of different things. But that was a key piece. And it was also a difficult piece because after a while, I started to feel very strangled in the language of human design and kind of felt myself pushed out by both literally by some of the community there who didn't like me changing the language. Although Ra was actually kind of okay with it, but we'd become quite kind of close then. But eventually I had to leave that world and carve my own path. And the transmission was very much alive in me. And then I had another opening. And it was another 3-day opening. It wasn't as intense as the first one because I think I was maturer. It was weird though, because I had, by then I got married and I had a young child. And then I had this transmission, this kind of spiritual thing in me.
Couldn't afford to lose another 7 years.
Yeah. Well, I was literally changing nappies and kind of receiving cosmic things at the same time. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And so it was much more integrated into real life. And then I started to formulate what became the Gene Keys in time.
So let's go to the visions that you were downloaded with in terms of where this is going for humanity. So we'll take the broad picture first, because you've said we're going through a new solar phase. And you've also mentioned the year in your works of 2027. That's only 5 years from now. So let's get a view, because as you say in the Gene Keys, it's very optimistic. Where we're headed as a species it's a very optimistic view of this. So please explain to us what you saw.
Yeah, well, I wrote the Gene Keys book in, it was published in 2009, and so that took a long time to write, many years, and it was my contemplations of the I Ching what I came to call the Gene Keys, 64 codes of life. And I took a long time contemplating and writing those, and that became the Gene Keys book. And I wrote them in a random order as they came to me. And some of them came in a rush, others came slowly in different ways. At one point, I was doing the 55th Gene Key, number 55. And it kind of was an anomaly from all the others. It kind of contained a prophecy, and none of the others had that. It was much longer, and it sort of poured through me. And in that prophecy was this is about the future human. And that was a very important key in Ra's methodology as well, because it's a breakthrough point where the precession of the equinoxes, if you're using the Gene Keys or human design, you can see in 2027, there's a huge shift in the epoch of, if you're using that system, and it's a shift into that key, into that code number 55 and 59, which is opposite. And those two together kind of are birthing a new epoch. So it's something completely new. And so that 55 for me was the key of, it became the key of freedom. And many, it was an anomaly, and lots of things kind of wrote themselves into that chapter. And I was quite kind of freaked out by it. And I thought, do I really want to go on the record with all this? Because it was about a future human, a collective consciousness, and a transitionary human that before we're in that, and possibly breakdowns in many areas of life, including perhaps our psyche, in order that new structure could come in. And I was very inspired by Ra's understanding of that, and the notion that it was going to be a cellular mutation actually in our DNA. And that resonated with me, like it's going to be a physical change in the architecture of our biology that, that will, come through, new children, a mutation. And mutations happen in species. They've happened in humanity in the past. They usually happen because of cataclysmic events of some form, or some crisis or turmoil, and they require often, they're either very, very slow and gradual, which is rarer transmutations, or most of them throughout history are very fast and rapid because of a crisis that happens. That's actually a biological kind of fact.
Absolutely.
So it makes sense of the earth changes that we're going through now, and the different, the difficulties that are all kind of coming to a head, and this whole, what I call the whirlwind, that 55 is part of what is called in Gene Keys the ring of the whirlwind. It's sort of a bit like the tower in the tarot. It's this incredible kind of shifting energy that's in our biology and in our outer life. So it's pouring through us. We have no choice but to go through the whirlwind. I wasn't shown what it would look like. I just saw the patterns, and I saw what.
Well, now we see what it looks like.
Yeah, we're now beginning to see.
Yes.
But I did see what it would become, because that's what I was in my 3 days. I was it. I was like, this is the future human. I'm in it. And it was just this extraordinary love wisdom, which we've heard of from our teachers and embodied beings, and it was real. And I felt it at every level of my being. And I felt the certainty of, like in St. Benedict's eyes, I felt the certainty of its coming. And I can't transmit that, but I do in my teachings. I feel it in my body. When I speak, it's there in the background. So I bring good news, really.
You do. And what's interesting about this, okay, in all of this work, this key number 55, I remember reading that it frightened you because it meant true freedom. And this was something that we don't really grasp yet. We're so busy clinging to the familiar so we can have any kind of sense of identity, which is literally blocking the flow of that light into our DNA to program ourselves in new ways. And so you had to contend with, like you said, should I even print this? But also the fear that comes up when en masse or individually we're confronted with actual freedom. So let's talk about that for a moment, because there's never been a period of time in modern history that we've been given the opportunity to choose differently than the last few years, as everything else, systems, institutions, jobs, everything are dropping away, shutting down. So can you talk about this notion of the beauty of the potential of this mass freedom in this transformation?
Yeah, I mean, the freedom ultimately is the freedom from fear. But in order to, move through that, to kind of harvest that freedom, we have to go through the shadow. And that's what the basis of the Gene Keys became for me. The work of the Gene Keys is that it's all begins with the shadow working, so it's why gutsy people are drawn to it, because you know, you've got to be courageous to really look into your shadows, and the keys show you your shadows. And they show you the gifts lying in those shadows behind them, like like the shadow is the seed, and then the gift is the flower, and then what I call the siddhi, which is like the divine essence, is the fruit. And so there's that. So, you know, we have to really look into those seeds of our suffering and understand them and know them inside us, and really feel them. You know, we can't sidestep those deep fears of our forgetting. We have to go through the layering of them, which is intense work, as you know. And so I laid out a framework so that people could do that work in detail, and they could kind of find their algorithms of their fear keys, and really really kind of imbibe them and contemplate them and see them in action, and have the courage to be in them rather than try and sort of get out of them or distract, because we distract ourselves.
Yes, in fact, you wrote something really profound, and I wrote it down here. I quoted you on this, okay? It said, fear is the raw material of higher states, which I thought was a pretty profound comment, because everybody is trying to shut down and run from the fear, and we do want to transform it, because it's simply something that's has to be moved through, so to speak, in order for us to move to the new levels of change. But what did you mean by fear is the raw material of the higher states?
Yeah, well, it's like I said, it's the seed.
Yeah.
And inside that seed is the gift. And it's always been like a joke, in a way, a divine joke, that I was kind of had that knowing that the way to heaven is not up, it's down. And the shaman always knew this. It's down in the underworld where our freedom is hidden. It's in the place we least want to look, and where we least expect. And so, in a way, I have this other sentence that I use quite often, which is that fear is safe. And it's a paradoxical statement, but it's a very powerful statement if you really let it deeply in. And the Gene Keys we have this thing called the Gene Keys approach, which is how we approach in Gene Keys, how we approach all the different aspects of the wisdom teachings, because there are lots of them. And we approach with gentleness and with deep patience. And that's how fear needs to be approached. You can't go at it with a sword. Mm-mm. You have to, like a frightened child or a frightened animal, which is what we are, we have to really be gentle with our own fears, so that we feel safe even in our fear. And if we can get to that state, we start to feel freedom, because we start to realize, oh my God, my life no longer has to be about trying to escape fear. So we befriend it in a way.
Yes. And you say, as you write about, and many of the other people I've interviewed coming from their different areas of wisdom say, this isn't just our fear. This isn't something that's just been propagated within this lifetime. We're carrying ancestral fear going all the way back to animalistic type survival. And our reactions emotionally are still functioning on that level today. So it's time, if we're going to be breaking through into this new level of lightness of being, and as you say, living loving wisdom, it makes sense the density of this fear we've been dragging in our subconscious with us through all of these millennia has to be addressed. And as you say, that's a really scary thing. I hope you're enjoying this video, because if you are, there are dozens more like it on my site, all supported by people like you. So if you'd like to keep this work rolling in and join our community, just click on the Patreon button at reginameredith.com. That also gives you access to insider commentary, my live book club, and other live events with special guests. So join in. Thanks.
The good side of it is, and of the Gene Keys that have really, I think, helps people and me as well, is that you have a word for each fear, but then you have a word for the gift that's hidden in that fear, and then you actually have a word for the transcendence of that fear. So I'll give an example, like one I always seem to use is conflict, because it's so like up in for all of us. You know, there's personal conflict, there's the collective conflict, there's, you know, it's everywhere in humanity, and the Gene Keys are like that. They're littered everywhere. But if that's one of your primary fears, is based on like you create conflict, or in your relationships, for example, it just happens all the time. then, what's the gift of that conflict? The gift is diplomacy. It's the art of diplomacy. So if you really work with conflict and you because it's showing up, you become an amazing diplomat. You become not in a sort of false sense. You become a natural empath of dealing with the fear of others and the fear of yourself. And so you then can move really fluidly through relationships in a very sympathetic way. And so that becomes then a gift that you can work with others, and you can really help people, who are in fear or who are in all kinds of, with health problems or all kinds of things, because it's all rooted in fear ultimately. And then the highest level in that instance would be peace. So conflict, diplomacy, peace. And peace is already there within the fear, within the conflict. So the conflict actually contains the kind of, it's like an acorn with the oak of peace hidden inside it. And that watering and that growing of learning the art of diplomacy is what finally brings us back to the peace that was hidden in the conflict. So what it does is it gives us an enlightened understanding of the shadow state. And that changes our whole reality, because then instead of like being dogged by this horrible thing that keeps coming back, it has a higher purpose.
It does. And I think it's very important that it's articulated and paired together so that you can see, first of all, there is no one that doesn't have shadow states in some aspect of their being. And this dives into pretty much all aspects of the being. We're actually going to break this down into a few parts because it's such a massive body of work. And I want to drill down in the next conversation. We'll be talking about kind of your life purpose. But another part that's just so dense with potential in a good way is the Venus sequence, which is our relationships in life. And you can look in one area, maybe you don't see a whole lot of shadow, but you look over here, oops, maybe that's the area I still have to look into a little bit further. And it's laid out in a way because everybody has some of these elements. You don't have to take it personally and feel somehow shame or guilt around having shadow, because a lot of people they don't want to delve into it because it's too painful. So what would you say for anyone that's just jumping on this particular part of your journey there?
Yeah, I would say, that repeat what I said earlier about gentleness and patience, that it's a journey, and that, I teach the art of contemplation, which is going very gently into these fear states. I mean, it's not like you actually have to really make them up because they're there every day anyway. So the moment you kind of begin to contemplate them, you begin to sense them, and you can see yourself feel them inside you. In fact, the more attuned you become, you realize it's always there. In fact, it's like a friend was saying to me the other day, we were kind of remembering like a holiday in the sort of 10 years ago, and we go, oh, wasn't that a wonderful time and all that, and how we do that. And he said, yeah, but do you know what? When you kind of reframe that memory, you take out the core contraction that's actually always there inside you.
Yeah.
You sort of take that bit out and you realize, oh God, it actually was there. Mm-hmm. And it's always there. And it's that kind of what we call the core wound. And it's like, as you get deeper and deeper in the work, you're less afraid of handling that, of dealing with that. You actually don't have to sort of do anything with it. You just create this space. That contemplation creates this space so that you can feel it, and you don't have to kind of worry about it. And then you create that slight distance inside you, and it enables you to relax more deeply, and then allow its transformational process, to kind of move through you. And Gene Keys is all about that transformation.
All about gentleness and patience in the journey. Okay, so another thing you mentioned is that many human beings believe that these shadow elements are actually our natural state, which I do not agree with. I don't think you agree with that either. So if you could please explain why this is not our natural state.
Yeah, well, I think if it was our natural state, we would have destroyed ourselves a long time ago. If you take something really simple like impatience, this is one of my keys in my profile. And, impatience, we kind of sometimes look at it and we go, well, I'm really impatient, and it's good. It can be a good thing because it gets me going and doing things. And actually, if you go deep into what impatience really is, it's a deep restlessness of our
Yes.
soul that cannot settle, right? And doesn't trust in the natural rhythm of the unfurling of life itself. So it's a real falling out of deep trust in our body. So working with that, it's not just like, oh, I'm feeling impatient. There's a deeper layer of forgetting behind it. And as we drop deep into that and we can see it more clearly, the patience, which is the gift hidden in impatience, begins to kind of saturate our system, our immune system. And then we begin to rest and relax, because we realize everything is all right. Everything does always resolve itself on its own, and we begin to feel that trust. So the shadow states are the raw material, they're the beginning of the journey, but so in that sense, they are kind of a part of what we are. But they're only a small part, and they really are shadows. They're mirrors, they're reflections of something that's really pure and sweet and eternal, and they're finite. A shadow is a finite state, whereas a transcendent state, like a siddhi, one of those higher states, like in the case of since I did impatience, patience, the siddhi would be timelessness, and timelessness is a transcendent state. It's an eternal state of consciousness. It's when if anyone's ever had a glimpse of that, whether through doing plant medicine or having deep meditation or whatever it was, sometimes just spontaneously a moment of timeless presence emerges, and we have that kind of merging energy with life, and that is our natural state.
Yes.
But the kind of joke in the game, and it's not always a funny joke, is that we have to go through these trickster energies, these kind of the turmoil, the trauma, in order to unlock these higher states.
Yes.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have issues where that's very beautifully said, by the way. I was going to share that when I was going through some of the gene keys with a book with a couple of girlfriends, we were having a little gene keys party, okay? And going through the activation or the main sequence, life purpose and life's work keys. What was really interesting is because we know each other well, we could see things in each other that were true that we couldn't see in ourselves. And I thought that was a really beautiful way to review the work a little bit, is in the company of trusted, mature, and I mean mature spiritually, all different age groups here, mature people who have the capability and courage to be able to look at both the shadow, but also it's even more difficult, it seems, for people to look at their gift, especially women.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it is especially women, but I definitely know what you mean. Yeah, we're very good at kind of wallowing our shadows. And so I kind of say, I have a little ditty where I just say, look, when you're doing this work, if you put 10% of your awareness on the shadow state and the other 90 on the gift and the siddhi, then that's a healthy balance. So because what it does is it means that there's always a part of you that's aware and alert for your own shadow, if it comes up, but most of you is focused on what's arising. So that gives you the pull, that gives you the boundless energy of like that light field that you really are. It's not about kind of dreaming of something in the future, because it is now. That state is now. It's just slightly concealed by the shadow. So by putting your awareness into that more expanded state, and literally using that art of contemplation, where you actually kind of you can begin by just imagining yourself as that state, and you can begin to see yourself as that gift, or and that's what brings us the empowerment to, because as you start thinking of yourself in that new way, it begins to happen. But it takes time. That's why patience is important, and gentleness for looking at the shadow, because you're right. People, we're very good at kind of doing hard work, like I'm going to tense up and going to work on my shadow now. And that's not the way.
No,
it's not a proven successful way to tackle these things. Going in gently and softly, and just allowing it through. And in, as you said, in the company of friends and allies, that's a beautiful way to work with the gene keys. And we're a big community around the world of people who are doing that work together, finding friends, there are a lot of gene keys groups and gatherings and people that work with them together. Some people like to work on their own, and it's been designed so that you can as well, because there's a sort of loner in me, and I kind of understand that as well. But ultimately, at some point, especially when you get to the Venus work, which we're going to talk about, I think, later, you need to have other people, because you can't see your relationship patterns without being in a relationship of some form. So,
right.
and that's where that's where the real deep patterns are hidden. So,
right. And when you're talking about solo work, because I had fun doing that with them. I mean, it's a party to us exploring all this together,
yeah.
But most of it I do by myself, because one thing is you can read it. You can read the gene keys in the book, but also when you start diving into the courses, you're able to listen to the audio files where you're flowing the information through. And I don't even know how you had time to record all of this, but all these different sequences and all the gene keys themselves. So you can sit and listen to your voice and just sort of contemplate and feel what's going on without having to necessarily intellectually engage. And this is really key because it's such a big body of work. Some people are intellectually overwhelmed. So maybe speak to that for a moment, because this is about discovering your genius. And that doesn't have to do with being some intellectually gifted genius. Genius means something much broader.
Yeah, genius is more to do with love, actually, and the capacity of us to be in tune with our heart, and that's really where genius flows from, true genius. Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and important for newcomers to gene keys to understand right away that this is not a knowledge system. And if you, for instance, came from human design, that's a knowledge system. So you're taking stuff in and learning it. And the gene keys is a wisdom transmission. So the wisdom, the transmission is between the words. It's the light field. It's in the consciousness. It's in the quantum web. It's in us. So wisdom is something that gets triggered from within us. It's already in there, as opposed to putting in knowledge. So that's the first hurdle, in a way, that many people have to get past. Is like, we're used to coming in from that left brain view and thinking, okay, I've got to learn something here, and I've got to learn all these words and things. And it's not the case. That's why I've recorded those things as audios, and I did all that kind of writing. So some people prefer to read, some people like to listen, some people just like to lie back, and there's meditations and things as well. But it's all designed for you to find your way into the wisdom that's already inside you. So in a way, the whole of the gene keys is a bit of a trick, and I'm really open about that. It's to trick you into your own wisdom. And so there's nothing I can put in you.
You call it wild wisdom, a system of wild wisdom.
It is. And
you say it's a system no one can tell you, no one can help you. There are no gurus. This is a process of finding the wild wisdom within you and self-discovery, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why contemplation is the key. No one else can contemplate for you. And it's a beautiful thing, contemplation. It's a beautiful word. When you learn the art, it's not just thinking. It's creating a circle in which you place a notion or an idea or a question, and then you keep the focus of that circle. And it can drift in and out of your consciousness. You can forget about it. That's fine. Part of contemplation is very liberal in that way. And you can use any other techniques that help you. But essentially, you're holding a soft focus on an area of your being. Might be a shadow, might be, one of those higher siddhis. And as you hold it there for weeks, months, even years, you begin to kind of inhabit it. It slowly seeps into you because it's already in you. So it starts to kind of trigger that part of our DNA. It's why they're called gene keys, because these higher states are encoded in us. And those,
yes,
yeah.
I want to go to that right now. As a matter of fact, gene keys, and you're talking about gene codes to stimulate these keys. So let's just get the technical understanding of what's happening between information, light, and DNA, and then our own ability to program that DNA. It's not already pre-programmed for us, although we do bring stuff in. So let's talk about that for a moment, because then I would like to go to another little place, because we're going to be doing activation sequences, life's purpose next time, and getting into your keys in life purpose, because I found that interesting. Yeah. So first, let's do the other one on DNA, light, information, programming.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'm a poet, not a scientist. So the view that you get from me is a poet's view of DNA rather than a scientist's view, although I have a basic understanding of the other as well. So I want to make that clear at the beginning. For me, when I had my 3 days state and other times, where I've been in that field, I realized that the light was coming from my DNA. It was coming from the core of my being. It wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from inside. And so I realized that those higher states are inside us, waiting for their time. So it's just like the future human and humanity that's coming is waiting for its time. It's waiting to emerge from inside us. That's why we use the figure of the dragonfly in Gene Keys, because it's a creature that emerges. It's a winged dragon, iridescent creature that emerges from a dark gray kind of underwater insect. That's, and it's a lovely story, that. So that kind of emergence is actually what it's all about. And we have our kind of genotype, we have our DNA that's kind of configured inside us with our predispositions and all that. What I kind of realize is that if you change the frequency of the programming, then you get a different response from the same DNA. So if you raise the frequency, so if the quantum field moving through your DNA, if the frequency of it, of the vibration of it goes up, then a different hidden component of its programming emerges. But otherwise, it's lying there dormant.
Right.
So that's why we have to, it's through our attitude, it's through our inner language, it's through how we see ourselves and the world, our worldview. All of that is programming the kind of quantum field of our being and our DNA. So when you work with the gene keys over a long period of time, your worldview really opens up, because you're really looking at things through these higher views, but you're not bypassing the shadow. You're not doing spiritual bypass. That's not permitted. Mm-hmm. Because it starts with the shadow, and you have to that you keep that 10%. You can never let that waver, even when you're doing really well, like that's the time when it's perhaps most risky, so we do begin to expand, and our DNA does begin to respond, because it is all imprinted in our body. So these higher states do genuinely begin to emanate from us.
This is where it also departs from a lot of kind of classic New Age programs, that if you just stay in a high state and think positive thoughts, it's all going to happen. Well, there is an element of raising your frequencies up, but you have to have the self-responsibility and maturity here to be able to acknowledge the parts that continue to nag or pull at your being energetically, and continue trying to transform those instead of just ignoring them and sitting on a mountaintop. That's I think the mature part of this. So what I wanted to get into is I alluded to it. No, I actually mentioned it earlier, the year 2027, and then also moving from Homo sapien to Homo sanctus, I believe it is. Is that what you call it?
Yeah, that's my name for it.
Yes, that's your name for it. I love it. So let's talk about what that means and the importance of 2027.
Yeah, well, as I said, that was, that's a kind of a marker, an evolutionary marker, where the precession of the equinoxes moves into a new frame for humanity, so a new epoch, and so you could literally, these things don't happen overnight. They're markers, so it's not like you come to that year and then everything changes. It's a bit like 2012. And 2012 is part of this process as well, as was 1987. These convergences, these markers. And 2027, in a way, is the last of those three markers from 1987. They're a triple set series, and and they're the kind of transition period for humanity. And so, but it doesn't mean like as soon as you get to 2027, it's like all over. But what it does mean perhaps is that future mutation begins to start cropping up in humanity, and it might be very subtle at the beginning. And at the moment, maybe we're kind of in the hybrid stage where we're seeing kind of early forms and with the increased kind of self-awareness moving through humanity. But at the same time, all the old kind of forms becoming more rigid. All of that is part of this transition. So I don't have any illusions that it's going to happen overnight. It's probably going to take a long time because, in terms of evolution, it's going to be very, very quick. But then Gaia has a different time frame from us. So if you think it's going to all happen in your lifetime, I think you might be disappointed.
True.
Yeah.
But we are seeing things change. We're seeing the human body change. We're seeing human capability, psychic functions change.
Definitely.
We're seeing mass allergic reactions within society to so many things, including food groups where we're just rejecting, our beings are rejecting things out of hand. And so it seems to me these are the markers that our body, our emotions, our psyche is beginning to clear the way through the new light, the new information, the new solar cycle that's coming in. And to me, that's a very exciting period of time.
It's hugely exciting. As I said, it's a whirlwind, and we kind of like, you need to think about how, when a whirlwind's coming, what's the best thing to do? It's actually to just kind of get rid of stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe not hide indoors, but actually just go out and meet it. And so you don't want to have sharp objects around, like those kind of judgmental patterns and things. You want to round everything off. You want to get rid of things. You want to be light. I don't mean necessarily in our possessions. I just mean in our inner being. So yeah, and I think it is a very exciting time. And I think it is. I am realistic. It is also a frightening time at the same time, because fear will ramp up. I think because it has to reach a kind of fever pitch.
It does.
In order that there's that breakthrough. That's the nature of metamorphosis. It always does that.
Yes.
If wherever you look in nature or biology or creatures, you see, like in the butterfly or the dragonfly, those creatures that metamorphose, there's always a very intense period of not seeing what's happening, not understanding what's going on.
Right.
And that's where the fear becomes very acute. So in a way, the Gene Keys and the Gene Keys community is preparing individuals and groups to be able to ride the whirlwind, confidently, with deep stability inside ourselves, and even with joyousness at times, perhaps. Yes,
well, hopefully there's joyousness alongside it. Okay, so before we wrap up, let's just talk, because we're going to be talking about the activation sequence and our life's work. And yours is Gene Key number 64, which is illumination. That's your key. So just briefly tell us what this is, as the person that has brought this information through, how this functionally operates in your own life as a 64.
Yeah, well, as you said, there are 64 of these keys. They're the codes to life. They're the codes in our DNA, 64 of them. They are probably the backdrop of the space-time continuum, which is a 64-fold structure. They are the fundamental basis of the musical octave, 8/8, and of geometry and fractals. And you'll find this pattern everywhere. It's actually it's embedded in our technology. It's 64-bit technology, and that allowing people to watch us right now. So it is everywhere if we really kind of understood these patterns. So yeah, it's funny in a way that my life's work, which is number 64, because that's been my life's work, is understanding these 64 codes, sharing them with others.
Illumination.
Illumination. I mean, and I had that experience. I have progressively had those experiences of illumination, and underneath that, the gift is imagination. Is like, how can I dream this into being using my human imagination? And that's where it started for me, is like, if I can dream it in, then it can, that illumination, it can begin to kind of touch other people's imagination and give them hope, and bring them out of the confusion, which is the shadow of that key, because we can be very lost with what's going on in the world today, and very deeply confused, not just mentally, but in our whole being. And so understanding, for me, it's been, I used to be quite confused myself. I like, what am I going to do with all this? How do I make sense out of my own life? And then the illumination kind of brought that into sort of an order inside me, but it's not a kind of linear order. The 64 is a wild order. It's like organic order, like everything has a hidden order, a fractal order, a kind of holographic order. And that's why, we in the Gene Keys, when you do these profiles, they're called hologenetic profiles. It's a holographic understanding of you're a part of a series of, your body is a part of a series of algorithms and formulas that run it. And your consciousness is inhabiting it. And your consciousness is the same consciousness as in other people, but with a different variation, So yeah, really understanding these keys can really help us understand our destiny and why we're here. And, the Gene Keys journey is about the journey. It's not like human design where it says, this is who you are. It doesn't tell you who you are. Who you are is an eternal mystery, right? You cannot answer that question with words, but it tells you the frame of your journey. Here's your journey. Here's what it looks like. You're going to meet this shadow. You're going to have to transform it into this gift. And it's going to flower eventually into this beautiful spiritual transcendent essence. That's the journey. It gives you the framework of that journey. And final thing I'll say is that because it's just showing journeys, many of us have similar journeys. So like if you're born on the same day as someone else, you've got a similar journey, but you're a different being. You're a mysterious soul inside there that's completely unique to you. That can't be caught by an algorithm, but the journey can. So two journeys identical with two beings in them create two completely different lives.
Yes. And I found it fun. I was playing with it. So I've looked into it a bit deeper than what I'm saying right now, but just as scratching the surface, I wrote down a couple of the characteristics of the number 43, which is my life's work, which really has to do with being a bit rebellious and not caring too much to step in with how society operates, not easily controlled by others, but here to bring new vision into the world. And so when I was reading that, I thought that's perfectly in alignment with certainly my father would tell you that. She doesn't like stepping in line behind whatever the norm is. And so I found that kind of freeing to see I'm doing exactly what I was born to do.
Yeah.
And I feel I really, I do. I really feel that. I feel that that's pointing to one's dharma. And so for me, it feels good to, in that part of my life, to have been able to step into that. So it was really fun because it's so obvious. Well, and the other people that I've been with, well, we've had our little Gene Key party, so to speak, felt the same way. They related very strongly to those first 4 points that come up in your profile. So whatever you've done there, it seems to speak truth, and it has so much light in it. We've been talking about shadow a lot, but actually this is filled with light. So any final comments before we bookmark this until the next time where we go into life's purpose? And then in a third conversation, we're going to go into the Venus sequence, which is how all of this helps us navigate relationships, maybe the most challenging thing happening in the world right now. So final thoughts, Richard?
I think my final thing is, like, if you're new to the Gene Keys and or even if you're not, like, just to remind you what I said earlier, that this is actually an easy thing to digest, even though there's a lot. And you even look at my book, it's like a big book, and you're like, wow, look at I don't have to read all that. You don't have to read all that. It's the whole code book. You only need to kind of understand your codes, and you don't even need to understand them. But when you read them, you might really enjoy reading them.
It's fun.
And I think it's an enjoyable journey, as well as it doesn't have to kind of overwhelm you or confuse you. If you are overwhelmed and confused, that's quite natural. But it's also a phase that as you begin to realize what this is, you'll let go of that overwhelm, that confusion. You'll start to really play, because it's a playful system. It doesn't take itself too seriously.
Yeah, it is. Play is a good word. That's what I use. We're playing with the gene keys.
Yeah.
Richard, I want to thank you so much for the years it took you to compile this for the rest of us. Thank goodness you're a 64 yourself, and illumination and truth are part of your journey, and to help us and inspire us to find that in ourselves. So until next time, I just want to thank you for taking the time today.
Brilliant. It's a real pleasure. Thank you, Regina.
You're most welcome. So everybody, you can go to genekeys.com. And also once you get there, you can play around, because there are individual courses that you can do. And Richard's recording his own voice. And like you said, you kick back. I was watching the birds out the window, listening to some of the audio files, and you can kind of take it from there. So next time we're going to look at our life's purpose, how we can perceive that from the shadow through the gift to the transcendence. And after that, relationships in the Venus sequence. Until next time, thank you for joining us here on reginameredith.com. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And you might also want to consider joining Patreon, which allows me to keep all of this content free and available to everyone. And if you're looking for like-minded souls, you might also enjoy my online community called Our Neighborhood. Links to join are in the description.